We've all seen these videos, supercars rotting in the desert, sitting in wrecking yards across Dubai and the Middle East, covered in layers of sand. Most of those cars weren't abandoned. Most weren't even bought there. And the image that sold us this idea came straight from pop culture. So in this video, I want to show you what's really going on. Why Fast and Furious 7 and the Lykon Hypersport helped cement this myth, what Dubai and the UAE actually are, and why one word, expat, changes the entire story. Once you see it, you really can't unsee it. So welcome back to Just Driven. Before we go any further into Dubai, expats, or abandoned supercars, we need to talk about this car, because the Lykon Hypersport is the reason this entire conversation really even exists. This wasn't just another supercar in Furious 7. This car was chosen very intentionally. The Lykon Hypersport was built by a company called W Motors, based in Dubai. And when it debuted, it was marked as the first Middle Eastern hypercar, a seven-figured statement piece designed to put the region on the automotive map. The asking price?
$3.4 million, 0 to 60 in less than 3 seconds. There's 7 of these things in the world, and this guy keeps it locked up in a vault.
The Lykon wasn't built like a Ferrari or a Bugatti with decades of motorsport heritage behind it. It was built as a symbol, a visual representation of ambition, luxury, and arrival on the world stage. Mechanically, it's actually pretty traditional for a hypercar of its era, with one interesting caveat.
Critical components such as the engine, transmission, suspension, and in fact the whole chassis are designed and produced by German manufacturer Roof. And they aren't even bespoke parts, they're all pulled from the Roof CTR3.
It's rear-wheel drive, no hybrid system, no electrification, just pure internal combustion. And here's the part people usually miss. It's a 3-pedal car with a 7-speed dual-clutch sequential.
This was exciting for me because it's got 3 pedals and a sequential shifter, which directly goes into the gearbox. And it's a sequential synchro mesh gearbox with 3 pedals. I mean, you actually have to use the clutch. You have to drive it. This car, the way it is configured, the prototype, is in fact manual. It's just sequential and shifting.
That combination alone makes it pretty special, especially in a world that was already moving away from anything that felt mechanical or driver focused. What made the Lykon famous wasn't lap times, it was theater. Diamond embedded LED headlights, gold stitched interiors, a design that looked like it came straight out of a video game. Honestly, that's exactly why it worked so well in Furious 7. By the time this movie came out, Fast and Furious had already moved beyond street racing. It had become global, cinematic, and intentionally larger than life. Dubai was the perfect backdrop, and the Lykon was the perfect visual metaphor. Here's something a lot of people don't realize. The Lykon wasn't really a local car in the way people assume. W Motors was founded by Ralph DeBas, a Lebanese entrepreneur. The engineering was global, the suppliers were European, the branding was Dubai, assembled under a Middle Eastern identity using international talent. Now, W Motors didn't stay with the Lykon for long. After the publicity wave passed, they quietly shifted focus to their Fenroll Supersport, a lighter, more performance-oriented car with higher planned production. Fewer jewelry, case features that alone tells you something important. The Lykon wasn't really meant to be a long-term manufacturing platform. It was meant to make a statement. Furious 7 was the most financially successful film in the entire franchise by a whopping margin. It did roughly 1.5 billion worldwide. And it didn't make that money because the CGI was crazier. It didn't make that money because they went to the Middle East, and it certainly didn't do it because of a hypercar jumping between skyscrapers. It made that money because everyone knew Paul Walker had died during the filming. By the time Furious 7 hit theaters, the question wasn't how insane is this movie gonna be? The question was, how are they going to finish this off? The Dubai sequence, the Lykan flying through glass steel, wasn't realism, it was escalation. It was Fast and Furious officially crossing into myth. But it was also something else. It was the last time we saw the full team together before the goodbye. For the first time, they weren't just street racers, they were an ensemble. Tailored suits, exotic locations, each character playing a role. It was Fast and Furious becoming its own Avengers. And then the movie slows down significantly, and the spectacle gives way to emotion. That's why Furious 7 did what it did at the box office. People didn't show up for a hypercar, they showed up for Paul. I'll never forget the day I found out. I had talked to him just days earlier. I watched it unfold in real time and didn't feel like it was real. That loss changed the franchise and it froze that moment in time. Here's where the story gets even more interesting and where a lot of the internet has gotten it wrong. They didn't throw real $3.5 million hypercars between buildings. In fact, there were no completed production Lykons available at the time they started filming. Dennis McCarthy, the car coordinator for Furious 7 and nearly every Fast and Furious film before it, confirmed that when production ramped up, W Motors hadn't finished a single customer car yet. There was no production Lykon to borrow, no finished car to film. At most, there was a test mule, but nothing usable for a movie, let alone a stunt sequence. So Dennis did what he always does. He went straight to the source. He flew out to meet the team at W Motors, met with the founder, Ralph DeBoss, and was given a full tour of the operation. He also traveled to Italy, where the interiors and upholstery work for the Lykon were being done, and saw the entire process firsthand. By Dennis's account, the team was incredibly welcoming, transparent, and eager to collaborate. Once it became clear that a real Lykon wasn't an option, the decision was made to build the movie cars from scratch. W Motors agreed to construct 6 Lykon replicas specifically for Furious 7, all designed to look identical to the finished production car. 3 of those cars were fully functional runners built with Porsche Boxster drivetrains, so they could actually drive, steer, brake, and perform controlled stunt work. The other 3 were static builds, essentially stunt bucks used for interior shots, rigging, and destruction. All 6 were built to Dennis McCarthy's specifications using the same design data and body geometry as the real Lykon. The goal wasn't to fake it, it was to make the audience believe they were seeing the real thing. And they did. Those weren't cheap knockoffs. They were purpose-built movie cars designed to look perfect on camera and then be sacrificed. And that's exactly what happened. Those 6 replica Lykons were wholly or partially destroyed to sell one of the most over-the-top sequences the franchise has ever attempted. Only 7 real Lykon Hypersports would eventually exist, and Fast and Furious destroyed almost that many copies before the public ever saw one completely finished. Which brings us right back to the theme of this entire video. Spectacle creates myth. Myth spreads faster than truth. And once you understand that, you're ready to understand Dubai, because the same thing happened there. If you've ever spent any real time on Copart or insurance auto auctions, you probably already know what I'm about to say. Buyers from Dubai and the UAE show up all the time in the bidding. I've personally been outbid on cars I was trying to buy, then scroll down, check the winning bidder, and see UAE or Dubai. And here's the part that really matters. When we see all those videos from creators suggesting there's so much wealth in Dubai and the UAE that people can just discard supercars like trash, that's not the whole story. It doesn't mean those cars were wrecked there. It actually doesn't mean they were abandoned there either. And it definitely doesn't mean they belong to some influencer who ran out of money and fled the country. In a lot of cases, those cars never lived there at all. And that's the piece most people miss. Dubai and really the surrounding region functions as a global automotive crossroads. Cars come in from everywhere and they leave just as fast. Think about it. A Ferrari totaled in Santa Monica. A Lamborghini crashed somewhere in the UK. In the US, when a car gets labeled totaled, it doesn't always mean the car is finished forever. A lot of time, it just means the labor cost to repair it doesn't make sense here. But that same car somewhere else in the world, it can make perfect financial sense. And this is where Dubai enters the picture. The UAE has built an entire ecosystem around repairing cars, dismantling them, and re-exporting them. It's fast, it's efficient, and it's designed for movement, not long-term ownership. Yes, there are strict laws that prevent heavily salvaged vehicles from being registered for on-road use in Dubai, but that doesn't mean those cars are stuck. They can still be imported, still be repaired. They can be stripped for parts. They can be shipped right back out to other markets. That distinction is huge because when someone sees a supercar sitting in a dusty yard outside Dubai, the internet immediately jumps to one conclusion: someone abandoned it. But the reality might be very different. It could have been bought at Copart, shipped halfway around the world, looked over for repair viability, and then dismantled. Not because it was worthless, but because the parts alone were worth serious money. An engine, a carbon tub, suspension pieces, electronics, even damage, these cars still carry enormous value. And suddenly, Dubai starts to make sense as a hub. It has one of the busiest ports on the planet, free trade zones, fast customs, very little friction for international business, and access to markets across Africa, Central Asia, and the Middle East. Dubai doesn't just collect cars, it moves them. That's why the same yards get filmed over and over and over again. That's why TikTok makes it look like the place is drowning in abandoned supercars. What you're actually seeing isn't a graveyard, you're seeing a pipeline. Now, does this mean expats never abandon cars? No, that does happen, and we'll talk about that. Dubai's debt laws have historically been strict, and in some situations people panic, leave quickly, and walk away from assets. That's real, but it's only one small piece of a much bigger picture, because sitting right alongside those few abandoned cars are insurance totals from the US, flood cars, theft recoveries, export inventory, and dismantling stock feeding global parts demand. Once you understand that, the image changes. The dusty Ferrari you saw on Instagram, it might not be a symbol of excess at all. It might be a car that lived its entire life in California and is just passing through Dubai on its way somewhere else. Let's talk about a word that keeps popping up in all of this: expat. And if you've never really thought about what that means, you're not alone. Most people haven't. An expat, short for expatriate, is just someone who lives and works in a country they weren't born in. That's it. It doesn't mean rich, it doesn't mean influencer, it just means you're not from there. And in Dubai, that detail matters more than almost anywhere else in the world, because the vast majority of people living there, depending on how you count it, somewhere around 85 to 90% weren't born there. That's not accidental. That's the system. Dubai didn't grow the way most cities do. It didn't slowly expand over centuries. It didn't rely on a large local workforce. Instead, it made a very deliberate decision. They said, we're going to import talent. Engineers, pilots, financial professionals, construction managers, doctors, tech workers, entrepreneurs. And to attract those people, Dubai offered something incredibly appealing: tax-free income. If you're a skilled professional and you're earning a strong salary and suddenly there's no personal income tax, your take-home pay feels massive. I'm rich, bitch! And a lot of those job offers come with perks: housing allowances, car allowances, schooling, relocation packages. On paper, it looks like a dream. And as long as things are going well, it works. Here's where it gets complicated. When you arrive in Dubai with a good job, banks see you as a low risk. You're employed, you're earning well. So yes, access to credit can come really easy. Credit cards, car loans, sometimes even mortgages.
It's free. Real estate.
We're giving you land.
It's free.
We're giving you a house.
It's real estate. Free.
Well, you gotta bring furniture, but the house is free.
2 bedrooms, no rugs. It's free.
You unlock the door to your free house. We got you the real estate.
Lose the job, and you don't just lose income, you lose legal status. And there is no long safety net waiting underneath you. If your income stops, the clock, it starts ticking. Now, this really came into focus during the 08-09 global financial crisis. When the world economy collapsed, Dubai felt it fast. Projects stopped, companies folded, and thousands of expats lost their jobs in a very short period of time. And here's the part that shocked a lot of people. In Dubai, not paying your bills wasn't just a civil issue. Guess what? It could be a criminal one too. Bounced checks, unpaid loans, missed obligations, those things could lead to travel bans, legal cases, even incarceration.
You're driving too fast, jail. Slow, jail. You're charging too high prices for sweaters, glasses. You ride to jail. You undercook fish, believe it or not, jail. You overcook chicken, also jail. Undercook, overcook. You make an appointment with the dentist and you don't show up, believe it or not, jail, right away.
So people did the only thing they felt they could do. They left. So cars were abandoned at airport parking lots. Vehicles were left behind in garages, not because people didn't care, but because leaving quickly was the only way to avoid consequences that would follow them. That's where those famous images came from. But here's the distinction that matters. That wasn't Dubai being reckless. That was Dubai being high reward, high risk. Dubai essentially says, we'll give you altitude. You decide how high you climb and how well you pack a parachute. Some people fly responsibly, some people misjudge the height. And when they fall, there's no illusion that it won't hurt. And the cars you see online, they're not symbols of endless wealth. They're symbols of risk without a safety net, mixed together with a global logistics system that moves vehicles in and out of a region every single day. And once you understand that, Dubai stops looking mysterious and starts looking exactly like what it is. A city built on openness, speed, ambition, and very real accountability. Let's zoom out for a moment, because the question was never really, why are there supercars and junkyards in Dubai? That's just the thumbnail version. The real question is, why do we want this story to be so true so badly? Why does the internet love the idea that Dubai is so rich, so excessive, so reckless, that people just abandon Ferraris like old furniture? Because it turns a complex place into a simple punchline. It lets us say, see, that's what happens when people get too much, too fast. But once you peel back the layers, that story falls apart. What you're actually seeing is a city that became a global crossroads, not a gold mine, a system that imports talent instead of growing it locally, a logistics machine that moves cars the way others move containers, and a high-risk, high-reward model that doesn't pretend everyone will win. And if there's one takeaway from this entire video, it's this: Dubai didn't create the illusion, we did. Now, I want to hear from you. Did this change the way you see Dubai? Did this change the way you see those viral supercar videos? And do you think the system like this, high risk, high reward, are the future or a warning? And if you enjoyed this deeper dive into the real stories behind car culture, make sure you subscribe, because we've got way more of these coming. Thanks for sticking it out, and we'll see you on the next one.